Good morning, family. This is Ricky, and welcome to Hope for Today. Are you hurting right now in your life? Is there some pain that you are experiencing? Is it a difficult season for you? Well, today's Devo is to encourage you. We're back in 2 Timothy chapter 1. Paul is talking to his son in the faith, Timothy. In verse 8, he says, "Therefore, do not be ashamed of the testimony about our Lord, nor of me, his prisoner, but share in suffering for the gospel by the power of God." I remember reading some excerpts from a book years ago when I was going through cancer that a family had sent me. And I think it was a poem, but essentially it was entitled, "Don't Waste Your Cancer." Don't waste your cancer. And of course, the book goes on to talk about this person's particular triumph, that when they were going through this unspeakable tragedy of this disease, how God instead used it to show them more of who God was, more of God's love, and then created a platform for this person to witness to the good news about suffering, that even in our suffering, Jesus still sees us, that Jesus is still with us, and Jesus still has a plan for us. And the point is this: even in suffering, God can use it. Ricky, give me some Bible. I'm glad you asked. Romans chapter 8, verse 28 says, "And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God and to those who are called according to his purposes." Now, a lot of us have questions. God, why am I going through? I'm faithful. I love you. I read your word. And we'll never fully grasp an answer that will satisfy us as to why God allows suffering. But the Bible does remind us that God uses suffering to further his purposes and to progress our relationship with him. And the whole idea is this: don't waste your suffering. So Paul is saying to Timothy in this moment of pain and hurt and tumult that he's going through, trying to pastor this church with all this opposition, that you ought to share in this suffering for the gospel by the power of God. He's basically saying, I'm sorry that it's a reality in your life that you are suffering with, but the good news of this: suffering does not mean an absence of the power of God working in your life. The only good news about suffering is that God's still there, and God still has a plan to use it to further his purposes in your life. A lot of you know the story of my mom, and she died from cancer many years ago. And in her last weeks and days, she was pretty much immobile. Her brain had almost completely shut down. She could no longer speak. She could no longer even open her eyes. And of course, she had these bands of people and men and women who would come into her room there in our home to come and sing songs to her and pray over her, just to encourage her in her last days. And I was told later that they would be singing a hymn and singing a song of praise, and then the whole crowd in the room would hush because something had happened. At the height of the singing, my mom would start twitching her hand. And they learned that that was a sign for someone to grab her hand. And she, with the last strength that she had left, would simply squeeze the hand to let that person know that she was there. And it was such an overwhelming moment that what ended up happening is, instead of the people encouraging my mom would encourage them. And some of you needed to hear that even when your power of speech is gone, even when your power of movement is gone, even when your power of thought is gone, as long as there's breath in your body, God can still use you as a witness to his gospel. The bad news is that a lot of us are suffering, but the good news is that even in suffering, you are not done. I encourage you to keep on keeping on and do that today. And that's hope for today. I'll see you next time.